Just days ago, Russia declared ownership of several Ukrainian regions. But each day since, Ukraine has undermined those declarations from Moscow with its victories on the ground. And we can take a look at some of those now. In the eastern region of Donetsk, they reclaimed the city of Lyman and nearby towns. Now, Lyman is considered a strategic city due to its many railway connections. But it's in the south that they have really made some of the most impressive recent gains. Just yesterday, in the region of Kherson, Ukrainian forces claimed to have pushed the front line back by around 30 kilometers, retaking the town of Buchani. And regional officials say that Ukrainian troops are moving along the Dnipro River, recapturing villages as they go. Well, Russia's recent losses are prompting domestic criticism of the army's strategy. One of Putin's allies said that Russia should now consider using low-yield nuclear weapons. So with the threat of nuclear war on the table, what buttons could Russia reach for? Well, both the US and Russia have nuclear stockpiles of between 5,000 and 6,000 warheads. And of these, the US mostly has large, long-range weapons. But 1/3 of Russia's stockpile is assumed to be so-called tactical warheads, which are smaller bombs for use on the battlefields. Now, tactical warheads have lower payloads and shorter delivery systems. Although they won't result in a global nuclear winter, they would still be devastating across a large area. So how real is Russia's nuclear threat? Well, the director of the CIA recently said that there is no practical evidence of Russia being close to using nuclear weapons. And other Western monitors have also said that there's no sign of Russia moving their warheads out of their bunkers. But now every Russian maneuver is being closely watched for any sign of whether Putin's rhetoric will move into reality.
Thank you very much, Soldaro there. Speculation over Russia's next move in the war was fueled this week by a video showing a train in Russia carrying military equipment. A British newspaper wrote that the train was carrying these nuclear weapons that Joel was just talking about. But defense experts have cast doubt on that claim. The video was posted on a Russian Telegram channel, which stated it was carrying armored vehicles to a specific Russian Army division. The same division handles Russia's nuclear warheads. But there's no evidence that the train was carrying nuclear ammunition, nor that it was heading towards Ukraine. A little earlier, I spoke to Konrad Muzyka. He's the director of defense consultancy, Russian Consulting in Poland. I asked for his analysis of that train footage.
Unfortunately, the analysis that we did was misinterpreted in many Western outlets, and which raised quite a lot of concern all across Europe, I think. But essentially, what this video showed was that there was a train that was on the move, and the train was carrying equipment which belonged to the 12th Main Directorate of the Russian Ministry of Defense. This directorate is quite specialized because it only deals with storage and handling and delivering of nuclear munitions to Russian units. The video did not show that the train was carrying any nuclear payload. At that time, we did not know where the footage was made, and we did not know whether the train was moving to Ukraine or out of Ukraine. Since then, more information was published, and we know that the train was actually moving northeast of Moscow, so quite far away from Ukraine, and still we are not able to determine whether the train was moving to Ukraine or not. However, it is a conclusion that this train was carrying nuclear payload and it was going to Ukraine was definitely far-fetched, and this is not something that we obviously wanted to achieve with our analysis.
OK, now, talking about the likelihood of the use of nuclear weapons by Russia in that conflict. Earlier, we spoke to a military analyst who said he doesn't think Putin will use nuclear weapon as it won't help him to win the war, but rather help him lose it. Would you agree?
I think there are a lot of risks involved when it comes to nuclear weapons, and I also don't think that that Russia can now win this war using tactical nuclear weapons. We know that NATO would probably respond. It's debatable. It's debatable to what extent and how. But I think it would only make it more difficult for Russia to achieve anything in this war, because I don't think that Ukrainians' will to fight, to defend their own territory, can be broken through tactical weapon, tactical nuclear weapon release. However, the truth is that, from conventional point of view, the only tool that Russia now has available is manpower. They do not have any special tanks, more aircraft, more infantry fighting vehicles that can deploy into the battlefield to change the situation. So they can only rely on the mass of the Russian armed forces to stop Ukrainian advancing in crucial parts of the front. If they will not be able to achieve that with the manpower, I think that Russian conventional options will run out.
Thank you very much, defense analyst Konrad Muzyka.
Thank you very much.
And now let's bring in Elena Sokova. She's the executive director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. Elena, do you think Putin is likely to use nuclear weapons at this point in the war?
I don't think we are at the point where the use of nuclear weapons is likely. And I would agree with the assessment coming from the director of the CIA that we do not see signs yet that there is a move to either deploy or make preparations for that. Moreover, I think that a use of a tactical nuclear weapon or any nuclear weapon at this point would actually make things much worse for Russia itself. And there are many reasons for that. They would certainly break the taboo. They would certainly break their own commitments and announcements and the doctrine. And it also would push away those who have not been joining NATO and West in sanctions or staying on sidelines, including key partners, India and Pakistan.
Now, how easy do you think would it be, and that's the question that's been on my mind for a long time, how easy would it be for Putin to carry out a nuclear strike, taking the chain of command into consideration? What is in place there? What safeguards are in place here, do you know?
There are safeguards in place, particularly when it comes to launching strategic nuclear weapons. Because as far as I understand, that there is at least 3 individuals who need to agree on the launch, push the button, so to speak. There is a little bit of a different situation with launching weapons on the battlefield. But still, in order to convey a command to the troops on the battlefield and give them ability to do so, there needs to be a decision that does not only involve Putin, but it's also the chief of staff and the minister of defense of Russia. But this is at least what we know. But again, I want to make sure that the viewers leave the program with the understanding that we're not there yet. And also we do need to monitor and we need to take it seriously. But there are no signs that this is something that is being considered or being an immediate move on the Russia side.
Elena Sokova, the Executive Director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. Thank you very much for joining us here on DW News.
Thank you. My pleasure.
The European Union has agreed to impose new sanctions, including a cap on the price of Russian oil, in response to the war in Ukraine. The security threat from Russia is also on the table as members of the European Parliament meet in Strasbourg. The EU Commission President has told MEPs that member states need to step up the security of their energy infrastructure. Ursula von der Leyen also said the EU is now ready to discuss a price cap on gas as prices are soaring. I'm now joined by our EU correspondents, Jack Parrick in Brussels and Max Sander in Strasbourg. Jack, let's start with you. What more do we know about the planned sanctions?
Well, we don't have the full details yet, Gerhard. The sanctions will be published in the Journal of the European Union on Thursday, when we will have exactly the details of what this price cap means. At the moment, we don't know how much it costs, how long it will last. This was a deal to get the legal basis for this oil cap. What we do know, though, is that the Hungarians, who were extremely opposed and have been extremely opposed to all fossil fuel sanctions, that they say they've got an exemption. The spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry tweeted to say that the sanctions don't harm Hungary's interests, been granted exemptions from the sanctions that would have violated Hungary's interests and endangered the security of their energy supply. So we know that that is a big difference in how these sanctions are going to be imposed, because until now they've required unanimity, all 27 EU countries. It wasn't only the Hungarians that had a problem with these sanctions, though. Countries like Malta, Cyprus, Greece, with big shipping fleets that have been shipping Russian oil, they've had their concerns as well. As I say, we don't know the details at the moment, and we'll find out exactly how they've managed to placate all of these countries to get this deal over the line. But the ambassadors did manage to sign off on them this morning.
Max, the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where you are, also debated the illegal annexation of Ukrainian land by Russia today. What's their position?
Right, Gerhard. So it probably does not come as a surprise if I tell you that across party lines, across political groups here in the European Parliament, the sentiment was that the annexation of Ukrainian land by Russia is illegal. It's null and void and meaningless. It does not change facts on the ground. This is something that all parties pretty much agreed to. There have been calls for further sanctions, some of these things that Jack just pointed out, and also some members or some groups, in particular the conservative bloc, has called for further weapons deliveries to Ukraine, especially tanks and heavy artillery by countries such as Germany and France. There have been calls for them to take the lead. But bottom line, here today at the European Parliament, the message is that Russia cannot unilaterally move borders. This will not be accepted by the European Union.
Thank you,
Max, there have been several nuclear threats by Russia's leader, Vladimir Putin. What's the position of the European Parliament there?
Right. So the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, the High Representative, spoke at the beginning of the session this morning in Parliament, calling it a source of concern that a nuclear power was retreating on the battlefield. Apart from that, we did not hear much about this nuclear threat. It does not seem to be the top priority among MEPs here. I spoke to one of the conservative MEPs on the sideline of the debate. He told me this. He believes that this is more of a scare tactic, that Russia will not use nuclear weapons, also because they would then admit that they would be defeated in conventional warfare. Furthermore, he told me that he believes the U.S. sent a very clear message to Russia already that if they used nuclear weapons in Ukraine or elsewhere, this would have a very strong conventional response. So it seems that MEPs here are really focusing on what Russia has been doing so far, and not so much on the future prospects of a nuclear escalation.
Now, Jack, back to you in Brussels there. This is the 8th package of sanctions since February. How effective have the previous ones been?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it, Gerd? Exactly that. I think from an EU perspective, they think that they have managed to be quite cutting on the Russian economy. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that they have been quick and decisive in getting this sanctions package over the line. As a bit of context, I think that they'll be very, very pleased that they managed to do it within the ambassadorial meeting here in Brussels this morning. We have a big summit coming up at the end of this week in Prague. All of the EU's leaders are going to be there, plus leaders from this new European political community idea, including the UK, countries like Turkey as well. And they really didn't want it to go over into that summit where you'd see leaders arguing over this. The sanctions are in response to the referendums that were considered a sham and to be illegal. But this is the big question, similar to what Max was talking about, this threat of nuclear war. There are so many complex, complicated issues around energy, around the type of warfare, around supplies that are really concerning for the European Union at the moment. The only tool they really have, Gerhard, at the moment is sanctions, and they've got this eighth round over the line.
Jack Parrock in Brussels and Max Sander in Strasbourg. Thank you both. Ukraine says its forces have retaken towns in the south and east of the country, including parts of the regions Russia illegally annexed last week. Officials who were installed by Moscow in those regions have acknowledged setbacks in the Kherson region. Our correspondent, Matthias Böllinger, visited Ukrainian troops in the south close to the front line. Despite looming fears of a cold winter, he found soldiers and local people optimistic about further gains.
They are digging in. These soldiers have only recently moved forward to their new position. Now they are fortifying their defenses, preparing the trenches. It's been more than 3 months now since Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced Kyiv's counter-offensive in the south.
We are constantly trying to drive the enemy from their positions. These attempts have been successful, and we are moving forward. We now have new positions, and we're fortifying them. That is how we make constant progress forward.
For quite some time, Ukraine's successes in the south have been less spectacular than those in the northeast of the country. But recently, the army has been able to make significant gains down south as well. The Ukrainians are convinced that their tactics are more efficient and also more sustainable than the Russians. But that doesn't mean moving forward is a walk in the park, though.
They just keep aggressively charging at us. They don't care about their own losses. You get the impression that they just don't give a damn about their soldiers. Their tactics are simple. It's easy to read them. But for us, this means that we have to be permanently on watch. We can never, ever lower our guard.
Behind the lines, villages have come under fire. Russian forces passed through this settlement early on in the war. Later, they were driven back. But since the territory has been back under Ukrainian control, Russian shells have been falling all over the place.
In the beginning, when we first experienced incoming fire and there were explosions everywhere, I thought it would blow up my house. I left at the time, but when I heard that things had calmed down a bit, I came back. I repaired the roof because it started raining. Then I decided to stay.
Russia has seen tremendous losses of personnel and equipment. That's why President Putin has started mobilizing more troops. But the soldiers here are calm about the prospect of more Russian reinforcements.
They can draft whoever they want and however many they want. But their own morale and the opinion of the locals towards them will not allow them to relax.
Now the soldiers are preparing for winter, hoping that they can gain as much territory as they can for as long as the conditions allow it.
Now, DW correspondent Matthias Böllinger filed that report, and he joins us now from Mykolaiv. Ukrainian forces, as we've heard in your report, are disturbed by how cheap the lives of Russian soldiers seem to be to their own commanders. Could news like that do anything to shift public opinion in Russia, do you think?
The question is whom they reach. I mean, the problem seems to be that in Russia the propaganda is working quite well and that people seem to be somehow still either believing it or finding it more wise not to contest it publicly. But these are not news. Russian lives that have been put at risk has been a topic of this war since the very beginning. When they came into Ukraine in the very beginning, Ukrainian soldiers have told us that they were shocked at how little Russian commanders value the lives of their soldiers. So this is nothing new. Of course, we have estimates how many how many Russian soldiers have died. There are estimates by the Ukrainian military, which puts them at around 60,000, which is a huge amount considering that they have probably invaded in February with a number of about 200,000, probably reinforced them then. Western estimates put them a little bit lower at 30,000, 40,000, but still that is a lot. We do not, however, know for sure how many losses the Ukrainian side has had. It has been a very costly war on both sides.
Now, you have spoken to Ukrainian officers and troops there. How important is it for them, how important is it for Ukraine to gain more territory quickly before the Russian mobilization takes effect?
It's important for Ukraine to take more territory, probably even before the winter arrives, when it will be more difficult to move. But also it's important, of course, for Ukraine and for the public morale in Ukraine that the Ukrainian army can regain some territory, because, of course, there's consensus here that now there cannot be any compromise with Russia on territorial issues, and that Ukraine needs to take all these territories back. The Russian mobilization is not seen as such a big issue here because for most people this seems just like Russia throwing even more untrained personnel at the front lines and probably just making Russian losses even higher. But expectations are that this will not change a lot on the battlefield if it does not come with a strategical and also a qualitative change in the Russian tactics.
Matthias, I'll let you go now. I can hear the air raid sirens. You better get yourself to safety. Thank you very much. Matthias Böllinger there, reporting from Mykolaiv.